All right, so we are in the age of enlightenment, and our learning target today, I can summarize the ideas of Enlightenment philosophers that begin to shape political thought in Europe and beyond. So remember, because of the Renaissance, because of the shift from the church having absolute power to humanism, where humans are seen as valuable, humans are good, humans do have impact on the world. This paved the way for these Enlightenment scholars. They start thinking, hey, maybe people should, think for themselves. And this starts to influence government, where these Enlightenment thinkers start to say, hey, maybe people should rule themselves. Because up to this point, we've always seen that mostly there were kings, monarchs, and they were absolute monarchs. They had total control and considered to have the divine right to rule. So the right to rule was given to them from God. So we're going to look at these at a few Enlightenment philosophers, and remember that philosophy is one of our vocab terms, a system of principles or thoughts based on study or investigation. So we're going to look at a few philosophers and what they thought that started to shape this idea that people could rule themselves, so government's going to change, and then how that may have even influenced our government in the United States of America. Okay, so this first one is Thomas Hobbes. And you can see these are some notes that we would have had if we were in class. So he has this overarching question of what is the basis of social order? So, what is social order? And through observation and study and investigation, Hobbes believes, by his study of people, that human beings are naturally cruel, selfish, and greedy. So he has a very negative outlook on humans. In 1651, Hobbes published a book called Leviathan, and he wrote that people are driven by a restless desire for power, and that without laws or other social controls, people would always be in conflict. That should say conflict. It's a typo on the note. Sorry about that. He believed that governments are created to protect people from their own selfishness. People are selfish by nature and cannot be trusted to make decisions that are good for society as a whole. So at the end, you're going to see that only a little bit of what he has maybe influences our modern government. His influence would more be for a very strict government, more of what we think of as probably like a dictatorship or even an oligarchy where, just a top few rule. Because he thinks that people are always desiring power and that they're cruel, selfish, and greedy. He would definitely not be influential for a big government or a democratic government. But he's definitely one of the Enlightenment philosophers that does start to influence the way people see government during that time. Okay, another one is John Locke. Okay, so John Locke, through his study and observations, his philosophy is that he starts to say, you know what, kings should not have the divine right to rule. Their right to rule does not come from God. In fact, it comes from people. In 1690, he published two treatises of government. His book is a strong, opinion for government that protects human rights. So John Locke says that the purpose of government is to protect people's natural rights, and those natural rights are life, liberty, and ownership of property. In exchange for the rights, people give the government the power to make and enforce the laws. So he's looking at a social contract where there is this give and take, there is this agreement. The agreement is that the people, the free people, citizens of the area, they agree that their government has the power to make the laws and enforce the laws as long as the government is protecting their natural rights of life, liberty, and the ownership of property. And so if a government fails to respect these rights, then the contract is broken and the government can be overthrown by the people. So that's where our one place that our vocab term contract comes into play. But this is more of a social contract. So it's not a document that's written out and signed, but it's an agreement between the people and the government. So if the government protects the people's rights, then the people give the government the power to rule. That's John Locke's influence and emphasis on government. Then we have the Baron de Montesquieu. So his observation through study and investigation was that too much power in the hands of any one person or group will lead to tyranny. So he's definitely going to be more influential for more of a democratic government than obviously a dictatorship. He's definitely saying that one person should not have all the power or too much of the power in the government. He's a French author. In 1748, he published The Spirit of Laws. He argued that the best way to protect human rights was to divide power among the three branches of government, or among three branches of government. So we already know that's going to be influential because our government is divided into three branches, like ancient Rome's government was. The purpose of this division is so that just not one branch ends up with too much power. Each branch has power to check or limit the power of the other branches. And the three branches of government, you can see, definitely influence ours today. You have the legislative branch, which makes the laws. This is Congress. The executive branch that enforces the laws. This is the president. And then the judicial branch, which interprets the laws, and that's our Supreme Court. So Montesquieu definitely has an influence on our government in the United States of America. And then we have this philosopher, Voltaire. So through his study and investigation, his observations are that freedom of thought and expression is the only way to fight oppression. So he believed that people should be free to think for themselves and be free to express themselves in the way that they choose. He's also a French writer and a participant in Paris businesses. He supports religious tolerance, our vocab term. So he believed that people should be able to worship in their own way, have their religion in their own way, not just have to follow the Roman Catholic Church. He's also a very strong supporter of free speech. This quote is a famous quote of Voltaire's, and it definitely shows us that he has a strong support of free speech when he says, "I disagree with what you say, but I defend to death your right to say it." Now you're kind of growing up in a time where people disagree with what you say, and they also think you shouldn't be saying it because they disagree with you. But that's not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is, the ability to say what you want to, even if other people do not agree with it. Now, of course, you can even, there's some things that, yes, you're free to say, you're free to make a threat, but there are consequences, another vocab term, if you make a threat. His freedom of speech was more towards, like the Roman Catholic Church controlling life. He felt like that people should be able to express their own opinions about life, about religion, about government, and not be arrested, like we know Galileo was, not be arrested for the things that they say. So very much a strong supporter of freedom of speech. And we can also already see his influence in our Bill of Rights, where we definitely have the, right to free speech. Okay, there's also some women of the Enlightenment. Women are, they're often a voice that's left out in social studies, in history. They can be one of the people that are left out. We don't hear from them. because, for a long time in history, women, they were seen as property. They didn't have rights, they didn't have freedoms. And even though this is still true during this time, there are some women like Mary Wollstonecraft, Madame Geoffrin, Abigail Adams, who were influential during this time period. So, women of the Enlightenment, we know that Enlightenment thinking is going to influence many people throughout Europe. We're going to see when we come back from break revolutions, the French Revolution, the North American Revolution, and some Latin American revolutions. And these revolutions are inspired by these Enlightenment thinkers, these thinkers that are saying, hey, a king should not be the only one that's in charge. Too much power in the hands of one person can be a problem. Hey, citizens, you have value, you have worth. You can think for yourselves. Maybe you could also be part of ruling yourselves in terms of government. So, very influential in what we're going to see happening when we come back from break. So, women in the 1700s still don't have the same rights or statutes as men. But there are a small few who played an important role by helping to spread their ideas about rights and equality for women. Names to the left, as I said, Mary Wollstonecraft is one, and she wrote A Vindication of Rights of Women and argued for equality and education rights for women. And then we have Abigail Adams and the French Madame Griffon. So there are some that we're starting to already try to influence not just how we looked at government, but how we looked at women and women's role in society. So to kind of just pull it all together, these are ideas from the four men philosophers, Enlightenment thinkers that we see have helped to shape our government, our Western democracy. So Hobbes, he is thought of without laws or other social controls, people would always be in conflict. We know that our government is full of laws. Locke, the purpose of government is to protect people's natural rights, his being life, liberty, and property. In our preamble to our Constitution, it lists life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we see his influence there and his idea of the social contract. That's our representative democracy. We vote for people to represent our voice in government. And in return for that, our rights should be protected, our freedoms should be protected. And we do have legal ways to hold the government accountable if we start to feel that they are failing to respect our rights. Montesquieu, his influence is the three branches of government, which we know as the legislative, executive, and judicial. And then Voltaire's influence is in our freedoms, our freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. So that's where we see a lot of his influences. Okay. So what you're going to do for your task 3, your product, is you're going to go back to the overview and to-do list for Monday, and you're going to click that link to answer a couple of questions. All right. Okay, see you back in class.